All right, man. I have a question. And I'm going to need you to be as honest with me as you can with the answer to this question. All right. Do you think that you are living a sinful life? Right? It would be weird if the majority of you was like, well, Jeff, I do dabble. Right? And the premise of this video is that possibly you could be living more of a sinful life than you are aware. Right? Let's check it out. Let's delve into it. What is sin? Sin is an immoral act. Right? And I think that's a simple definition that a lot of us can agree upon. That sin are acts that are immoral. All right? But in order for something to be immoral, there must be some rules established as to what is and what isn't moral. Right? And another word for rules is laws. So sin is when you break a moral law. Sin is breaking a moral rules, right? But who creates these rules? Who creates these laws? Right? And I think we can agree that God has created morals, that God has created laws as it relates to what we should and should not do. Right? So, in essence, sin is breaking God's law. Right? When you go against the laws that God has created. And what exactly is a law? Right? And why do we have them? Laws are rules set up to maintain control for the most part. Right? So that things don't go out of control, so that people don't go out of control. God has created even natural laws so that things are maintained, sustained. Right? That's what natural laws for. But God's laws were created not to maintain control, but more so to maintain a relationship. Okay? Your behaviors, your immoral actions doesn't necessarily place your life out of control, but what it does is destroy your relationship with Him. God has an interest in forever communicating, forever relating with you, right? So God has created laws that strengthens His relationship with you, and He has created laws that create behaviors that even enhances that relationship with God, that brings you even closer to Him, right? So when you sin, your relationship with God, God's ability to communicate, God's ability to draw close to you is disabled, destroyed, weakened, right? But what has happened over time is that there has been a sin model created, right? There is an agreed upon list of sin that has been created over time that allows us to feel that we don't live a sinful life if we've kept those agreed upon sins that has been created by mankind, by us, right? Right, and we know what they are. There's the 7 deadly sins. You can go look those up. greed, lust, and all that beautiful stuff. Then there's the 10 Commandments, the thou shalt nots, right? And we feel really comfortable in our relationship with God. We stand up really firmly in our relationship with God. We walk freely in our relationship with God. We talk about God. We study. We worship. Right? We have a lifestyle of spirituality in freedom without guilt when we know that we've at least kept those, the agreed upon sins, out of our lives. And if we've kept those agreed upon sins out of our lives, we feel really comfortable saying, you know what? I live a sinless life. What has happened, however, is that we are focusing so heavily on those agreed upon sins, those classic learned list of sins, right? That we have unfortunately been blinded by the possibility of there being sins that we don't focus on, that we're not focusing on, that we are committing unawares, right? And this is the essence of this video today, is to get you to understand that there could be unawares, sin committed unawares, that is disconnecting you from God, and you may not have a clue as to why this is happening, right? But for you to understand this, you must accept that there could be more to sin than what you recognize, right? That sin may have wings that span a lot further than what we recognize or than what we are willing to recognize, right? That there could be nuances to sin that could be affecting your life. All right. Let's look at a Bible verse that can explain that a little better. The nuances of sin that can go hidden and at the same time hinder your relationship with God and could be causing you to break the laws of God. Turn with me to Matthew. Turn to Matthew, the 5th chapter, and we're going to read just 2 verses. We're going to read the 27th and 28th verse. So turn to Matthew 5, and we're reading 27 and 28, and it reads as follows: Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. All right? So this is Jesus talking, right? And Jesus came to earth to be the fulfillment of the law. Jesus came to earth to be the fulfillment of the 10 Commandments, right? Jesus was the physical embodiment of the 10 Commandments and an enhanced version, a strengthened version of the law, right? And what Jesus was saying in this verse, that sin can be hidden in nuances, right? Jesus said to them that, okay, I know that it was said in the old times. I know that there are traditions. I know that there are agreed upon behaviors, right? And that's what the 10 Commandments were. They were an agreed upon behaviors for the people of God. The 10 Commandment was a written contract between God's people and God. And on that contract were delineated behaviors that should not be committed, right? But because Jesus was the physical embodiment of the Ten Commandments and an enhanced version of it, Jesus was saying that, yes, in old times, it was enough to not lust, but there could be a nuance to lust that you could be missing, right? Up until Jesus Christ, everybody was satisfied with their lust for women as long as they weren't lusting overtly, right? As long as their tongue wasn't hanging out and their chest wasn't pulsating, then they were comfortable in saying that they weren't lusting after a woman. They could check off that sin, right? But Jesus said, let's look at the nuances, right? You may not be sinning overtly, but even if you're thinking about it, that if you're lusting after that woman in your mind, it's the same behavior, right? So sin has the ability to be nuanced and be hidden, and at the same time have the same effect on your life as if you were doing it blatantly, intentionally even. So Jeff, what are you saying to me, brother? What are you saying to me, right? Are you saying to me that there could be some sinful acts that I'm committing in my life that is unknowingly to me complicating my relationship with God? Yes. Yes. And it's only happening because you don't fully understand what sin is, right? You don't fully take in consideration the definition of sin, right? And you, just like the people that Jesus is speaking to in this verse, are focused on what the people of old have said, right? You are focused on the sin model, the Ten Commandments, the 7 deadly sins, right? You're unaware of the fact that sin, and I've used this word so many times today, is nuanced. That sin doesn't necessarily have an established identity, doesn't necessarily have a recognizable identity or morphology, right? That sin, as Jesus showed us in this verse, that sin can be overt, something that you can see, something that you're conscious of, something that you can be aware of, that you can sense. But it also can be something invisible, like a thought, right? Sin, again, does not have an established identity, a visual identity that you can recognize, that is easily recognized, that is the same every time you see it. Again, it's nuanced, right? And when you step back and focus on what sin is, then you will recognize that there are a lot of other behaviors that can exist under the title of sin, right? And again, we said that sin is breaking the law of God. And we said that breaking the law of God, breaking the rules of God, are called immoral behaviors. So there could be, again, nuanced immoral behaviors that are going under your radar or underestimated, right? What are the laws that God has established for you, right? There are things that God has said to you that he doesn't want you to partake. He doesn't want you to say it, doesn't want you to go there, doesn't want you to touch it, There are rules that God has established in your life that he expects you to follow. Right? And those rules are equally as authoritative in the mind of God, in the heart of God, as the sin models. And this is where the underestimation comes in, right? God has established things in your life. God, in essence, has said to you, thou shalt not, let's say, marry that woman, right? God has shown you that you shouldn't marry that woman. Thou shalt not marry that woman, right? But because that thou shalt not isn't part of the sin model, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not kill, right? We underestimate that personal thou shalt not. But in the mind of God, every rule that he has established carries an equal amount of weight, an equal amount of authority. All right? That thou shalt not marry is equally as authoritative as thou shalt not murder. When God says you shouldn't marry that woman, that thou shalt not marry that woman becomes the 11th commandment, because he expects it. Right? And again, because the thou shalt not marry that woman isn't part of the sin model, we don't take it, we don't recognize, we don't reverence that thou shalt not the same way. But really it holds the same amount of weight. It is sinful if you break that rule. God has shown you, God has erected rules in your life. And those rules that God has erected in your life, albeit just for you, albeit rules that are centralized in your life, not necessarily rules that apply to me, right? God may say to you, thou shalt not marry that woman, and then come to me and say, hey, that's the woman, right? Just because, number one, it isn't part of the sin model, and number two, those rules are centralized particularly to you, doesn't mean it carries less weight authoritatively in the mind of God, and God in some way isn't expecting you to fulfill those rules at the cost as every other rule that he has set up, right? The results of sin, whether it's a sin from the sin model or the personalized rules, the results are the same. You break the law of God, you affect your relationship with him, right? So again, because it's not part of the 10 Commandments, because it's personally to you, we underestimate it and we don't feel the necessity to fulfill those rules as we do the universal sins that is established through the 10 Commandments, or the seven deadly sins. All right? Is that clear? Is that clear? It's going under the radar because it's not part of the 10 Commandments. It's going under the radar because you feel like, well, that's just something God has set up with me. God doesn't want me to drink. Therefore, it can't be sin because he's allowing someone else to drink. God doesn't want me to eat these foods. God has established laws in my life to eat particular foods. But it can't be sinful if I break that law because he's allowing someone else to eat these foods without the same consequences. And my point is, you're wrong. My point is, if God has established a law, if God has erected rules, he expects it. And the thou shalt not in your life is equal to thou shalt not on the 10 Commandments. Right? Equal. When God says thou shalt not, regardless if it's on the 10 Commandments written on a rock or if it's written on your heart or written in your mind, he expects it. All right? And last but not least, I'm going to finish here. Oftentimes when it comes to sin, we focus on the thou shalt nots. And I've spent a lot of time in this video talking about the thou shalt nots. Sometimes God creates rules in our lives that are thou shalt. Right? God has shown you what he is expecting of you. There are things that God has shown you thou shalt do, that what thou shalt be. Right? God has shown you you will be a pastor. God has shown you that you will be a great father. God has shown you that you will be a great business person. Right? And those thou shalt be carry the same weights as those thou shalt nots. And not becoming what thou shalt be is breaking the law as if you would break the law of a thou shalt not. I really hope I'm getting this across, right? When God say thou shalt, he expects it. Whether it's thou shalt not or thou shalt be. His expectations is expected no matter what. And the fulfillment of or the failure of the fulfillment of is considered sin, is considered breaking the law, breaking the rules, is considered sin. Right? So if God has shown you that you will be, he is expecting you to be. The failure of a thou shalt be is equally sinful as you doing what thou shalt not do. I hope I'm getting this across. I really do. All right? All right. So it all is understood by the definition. Sin, in essence, is breaking the rules, breaking the law of God. And breaking the law of God, whether it's a universal law of God or if it's personal between you and God, it is still sinful. And that it has the same effect on your relationship with God, and it has the same effect as of breaking the universal laws, the 10 Commandments, the 7 deadly sins. There's no difference. When God expects, he expects. When God says thou shalt, God expects. Okay? Focus on that. Remember that. Remember that sin doesn't have a face. Sin doesn't have an identity, as it were. Sin is any behavior that breaks the law of God, that breaks the rules of God. And if I am breaking the rule of God, even if it's just a personal rule, it is equally as sinful. All right, I gotta go, man. I've spent more time on this video than I expected and I wanted to. If you don't understand, let me know in the comments. Comment and let me know what you think as well. I think this is an important understanding and key for you, for a lot of people who are trying to accomplish things in life, that don't underestimate what God is expecting from you. That not being whom God has called you to be is equally as sinful as if you're lying. Right? And just because God is expecting solely of you, because the rules that God has created in your life isn't universal, doesn't make it any less sinful for you to do it. Right? Keep that in mind, man. Keep that in mind as you go about your life. Sin is nuanced. All right, I gotta go. Again, leave me a comment on what you think about this. Give me some example of some of the personal laws that God has created for you. What is God calling you to do that isn't necessarily what He's calling other people to do? I would love to know what that is. Share the video, man. There are people who are living a sinful life, unknowingly, possibly, right? Unknowingly, and wondering, hey, why can't I feel the presence of God? Why aren't the things that I'm doing successful? Why are these things happening in my life? They could be living a sinful life, not really knowing it. Share the video, man. Subscribe to the channel. If any of my videos in some way has aided you, sign up. Become a subscriber to this channel. I focus on understanding. I focus on the perspective of the Bible that may or may not be universally understood or taught. You know, so subscribe, man. I think I got a lot of things that I can show you. And there's a bell icon, man. Click that bad boy, and it'll let you know every time I upload a video. And we can have a pressing toward the mark party every week. I try to post these videos every week, and every week and a half at the most. I do work, I do have a job, but I try to, at the most, every week and a half, right? So, man, I gotta go. I say it every week. I mean it every week, including this one. Thank you for showing up. My name is Jeff Staten, and this is Pressing Toward the Mark. One love.